a terrible dad, a childish genius, and one of the greatest Nen users currently alive, Jing Freecss. Today I'm gonna go over his involvement in the manga, and because he interacts so much with Beyond and Pariston's crew, we'll also be going over them at the same time. If you haven't watched my video about Pariston, I recommend you do that because we learned so much about him during this time. However, this isn't the video where I'll be reading into him that much. However, there are a few things I missed in that video, so I will be adding a few points about him. But anyway, let's get into it. So a quick recap of the current situation for those who might not be aware. Isaac Netero's son has been declared the leader of Kakin's trip to the Dark Continent, and that's a whole problem of itself, but Beyond also has a personal crew who's led by Pariston, and that's where we start talking about Jing. So during a meeting with the Zodiacs, Cheadle says two things about Jing that's very important to know. First, Cheadle says Jing has requested to withdraw from the Zodiacs, meaning he's no longer part of the group. And through that, he's trying to say he's leaving the Hunter Association. But it's very important for future understanding that Jing is leaving the association itself. He's leaving because his ideals, wants, needs, and loyalty no longer align with the association, but that's completely different from him leaving behind being a hunter, or leaving what it means to be a hunter. He still is and will forever be a hunter. The second thing is, in a discussion the Zodiacs were having, Gel says how Beyond has been preparing for this moment for decades. And I can more or less put an actual number on it, because about 50 years ago, Beyond returned from his first trip to the Dark Continent, and shortly after that, his father worked with V5 to ban all travel there. So considering he was planning for decades, it's very likely he started preparing for his chance to return the day he was not allowed. Then Gel asks if there's anyone else who thinks that way, meaning has anyone else been planning for this moment for that long? And then I believe Cheadle says there's only one man who she could think of that thinks that way, and we're then shown Jing, implying that if anyone has been planning for as long as Beyond has, it's Jing. So stuff happens, and Beyond ends up leaving his crew to turn himself in to the Zodiacs, which leaves the crew all alone. And at the same time, it just so happens Jing arrives at their base, where Pariston and parts of the crew are waiting. If you don't already think Jing is very smart, you'll soon see he is. However, because of the timing of Jing's arrival, I think it's very possible Jing had planned this carefully. I think he specifically chose a time to infiltrate the crew when Beyond wasn't there. I'd say mostly because Beyond's influence would be difficult to work around, but you could argue Jing wanted to avoid a more violent conflict, avoid a possible fight. However, I think Jing was far more worried about Beyond having influence on the crew rather than worried about a fight, because I guess it's worth mentioning that I'd suspect that both of them will be around the same level of fighters or Nen users, maybe. But the most important fact is both of them choose to plan and talk before choosing any violent path. So to me, it just seems like Jing was far more worried about Beyond having influence on the crew, stopping Jing from getting what he wants done. And like I said, I'm not diving into Pariston that much, but when Jing arrives at the base, Pariston is a mixture of upset and excited. Jing tells Pariston to let him in on the fun, and that he's tormented and messed with the Hunter Association long enough. He goes on to say how if the world didn't let Beyond go to the Dark Continent, Pariston would release 5,000 Nen using Chimera ants into the world. Jing then releases his aura and tells Pariston that he will be Pariston's game, and that it's time for Pariston to stop messing with the Hunter Association and fully focus on Jing's challenge. And although not stated, Jing's challenge is basically keeping Pariston from getting what he wants, thus creating a game where both Jing and Pariston are trying to gain and then keep the upper hand. Pariston then releases just a tiny bit of aura of his own and says how Jing will finally pay attention to him, but Jing just says we'll see about that and says how he might be doing all this for his own fun. It's important to say that Jing is doing all of this for two reasons. The most important reason is Jing wants to explore the Dark Continent without bounds. However, Pariston's threat to the Hunter Association and the world is too great for him to ignore. I said this in my Pariston video, but Jing didn't choose to protect people because he's some kind of hero. It's that he has just enough morals or empathy for him to see that Pariston essentially needs to pick on someone his own size. Also, if you don't think Jing is a not great person, well, let's just look at how he abandoned his son, how he likely knew what would and did happen to Gon during the Chimera Ant arc, yet he did nothing to help him. Although I guess you could say he knew he was going to be okay. There's also the fact that he did nothing to stop Pariston from keeping or acquiring the Chimera Ants and decided to wait until now to do something about it. And you can have excuses for why he did those things, but the point is, even though Jing will protect people, it still doesn't make him a great person or a hero. Yes, he's a saint compared to people like Chrollo or Hisoka, but once again, he's not evil, but certainly not good. But back to my main point and the main part of the story. When Jing says that he might just be there for his own fun and he might not even pay attention to Pariston, not only is this a taunt at Pariston, but it also shows Jing's confidence. Confidence that he's in control of the situation, as well as confident Pariston will be no issue for him, at least at the start of their game. I do think Jing sees Pariston as a worthy adversary, but at this very moment, Jing is in control. Another objective Jing has within this interaction, as you'll see further, is to make it clear to Pariston that he's the one with the upper hand, to show Pariston that he can't read him like everyone else, that he's nothing like Pariston's past opponents. A final note for the beginning of this interaction is that Jing showed off his aura, and normally I think neither Jing or Pariston would show any sign of their powers, especially in front of each other, unless they were confident that it wouldn't matter. Jing showing off his aura isn't something he'd normally do, but he's doing it because he's confident it doesn't matter, as well as he wants to taunt Pariston while also showing he's serious with his challenge. Then the obvious note that even though it's likely not his true strength, we see that Jing is indeed very strong. Then Pariston basically tries to act all innocent. At first, he's like, Jing, why would you assume I'm doing something bad? But he moves on to explain that depending on how negotiations go between Beyond and the Hunter Association, the outcome of that is what Jing should be concerned about. Then here we have two different translations of what is being said, and it greatly changes how smart and prepared we should see Jing being. The first part is the same for both translations. Jing says how Pariston isn't even thinking about negotiations, and he's playing his own game, playing by his rules. Jing then asks Pariston why he didn't ask him how he knew that he even had the Chimera Ants. But then Pariston's response to all of that is what's different. In the official translation, Pariston says, "It's not like I was trying to hide it," which makes it seem like Pariston is not worried or surprised or upset that Jing knew that information. That, as he said, he wasn't trying to hide it, so it's no surprise Jing found out. However, in the fan translation, Pariston says, "Because you didn't seem aware of it at all." This is way different than "I wasn't trying to hide it." With this, it seems that Jing knowing about the Chimera Ants was a total surprise, that Pariston was likely trying pretty hard to hide it, yet Jing still figured it out. And if we go that route, then this would be a tough hit for Pariston. He's so used to being 10 steps ahead of everyone, and now he's not only seen Jing's confidence, but proof as to why he has it. Pariston is realizing that Jing really has come prepared. It also shows to Jing's intelligence, and if not that, his access to resources or ability to figure things out or to investigate. However you want to give Jing credit is up to you, but he is one or several of those things. However, I lean towards intelligent. Jing then explains the reason why Pariston doesn't approve of the Hunter Association's likely response, which would be to work with the world's top government governments called V5 and working with them to recruit personnel for the Dark Continent expedition. Jing also says how this is the most realistic and efficient way. However, to Pariston, it's the most boring and something he doesn't want to happen. Jing then says what Cheadle is doing is the same as what Netero would have done, but Pariston disagrees and says Netero would never do that. Pariston says how Netero would have ignored V5's wishes and would have gathered his own selection of hunters, found a faster route to the Dark Continent than Beyond, and then once there, announced the hunt for his son is on. Hunt as in stop or arrest him for exploring the Dark Continent, not necessarily kill him. And Pariston also says that this is the way the Hunter Association should act. And I know I'm not reading too much into Jing so far, but it's mostly just because the importance of Jing right now is just how he's reading Pariston like a book and he's just showing off how much he knows. Jing then responds by letting Pariston know that he knows exactly what his plans would have been. Jing calls Pariston a baby crying for attention, and if the association became boring, he'd find a new game to play. This is also something Pariston warned Cheadle of. Just a fun fact. But anyway, Jing says that to Pariston, the fastest route to a new game would be to dump chimera ants into the world. This would also help encourage the Hunter Association to change their view on the Dark Continent. However, Jing does say that if the Hunter Association showed a backbone, or if Pariston didn't choose to just let the chimera ants into the world, Pariston would instead send the chimera ants to take the Hunter exam, although Jing does say he has no idea what Pariston would do with a Hunter Association filled with chimera ants. And I'd argue that Jing doesn't know because not even Pariston thought that far ahead. Then Pariston seems very upset that Jing was able to read him and figure out his plans so well, and he then says that he and Jing are very similar, and they both think in unorthodox ways. But a further explanation of that, they both try to figure out people's plans and then plan several steps ahead. However, Pariston's clear unhappiness represents how this time it was his plans that were found out, that he's now the one 10 steps behind. And the amount of information Jing has gathered just proves his intelligence or his ability to investigate or whatever you want to call it. It's also kind of evidence that Jing likely waited until he could gather as much information as possible before he made any moves. And just because I don't want people thinking I contradicted myself, if you want to say Jing didn't stop Pariston and his chimera ant army because he wanted to wait for the right moment, that's fine, but it still doesn't change that he allowed something bad to happen, and there's plenty of other things that show Jing isn't evil, but he's not good either. But moving on. Pariston's response to what Jing just said, once again, has two very different meanings depending on the translation. The official one says, "What a way to put it, but you're right, so whatever." This makes it seem like, once again, Pariston is not worried or upset that Jing figured out his plans. It might even show that Pariston's plans weren't even that hard to find out. However, the fan translation says, "Wow, you really know how to lay into someone. That was harsh, but you were totally spot on, so no hard feelings." Once again, the fan translation makes it seem like Pariston was caught off guard, that he didn't think his plans would be figured out. At least not to this extent. I also think that the interpretation that Pariston feels like he's being caught off guard and is upset Jing is so much more prepared for this challenge is supported by the overall way Pariston acts. Throughout everything you'll see, Pariston is constantly being outplayed and surprised and disappointed and annoyed. All things that make me come to the conclusion that Pariston is not only being outplayed, but he wasn't ready for an opponent as skilled, smart, strong, whatever, as Jing. Pariston then, kinda out of nowhere, goes on about his forms of love. He says how normal people feel happiness when they love and are loved back. However, he feels happiness when people hate him, and he feels compelled to hurt the things that are dear to him. And he then asks if that's so strange. Then Jing says something pretty interesting. He says, depends on the extent, which is kind of wild because he's not even saying Pariston is wrong. He's just saying that there's a limit to what he could allow. This further supports how Jing isn't really a hero or a super good person. He just has a certain point he won't cross. But I think it's kind of interesting that that's the only reason Jing brought up for how they're actually different. However, once again, I want to make it clear that I do not think Jing is evil. He just allows more bad things to happen than someone I would describe as a hero would. Then, a crew member named Curly tries to make a point, but Jing tells him to shut up. And then another crew member named Usman comes over and asks, who does Jing think he is? Coming in acting like he's in control. Then Jing grabs him by the shirt and starts beating his face in. And beating his face in is not an exaggeration. Then something a little weird happens. We see that nothing actually happened to Usman, and Jing's fist stopped right in front of his face. There's a semi-decent argument that this was some kind of Nen ability to do anything as simple as cause an illusion, but I've also seen something as wild as he turned back time. And although I think those ideas are really cool, I think it's much more likely that Jing's one punch made Usman see what would have happened to him. There was so much intensity behind that one punch. Usman saw his life ending. Pretty much what Saitama did to Genos, if any of you have seen One Punch. Usman is understandably very freaked out, and Jing says, got it, now stay out of this. Few things to go over. First, we see a little more of how Jing isn't really a great person. What he's not willing to do, I believe, is limited to hurting powerless or innocent people. If you're someone like Usman, someone who's likely strong, yet still way out of Jing's league, Jing is willing to do what he has to in order to get what or where he wants. He'll hurt you or even kill you if you get in the way of his goal. However, there is another way to look at it that I think is just as plausible. Jing could have wanted to purely show off his dominance and power to everyone in the room without ever having the intention to actually harm anyone. In fact, later, Pariston is the only one Jing threatens, so you could interpret what Jing did as something with no real hostile intention. He just wanted to prove his standing in the room in terms of power, while also allowing his talking to show off his intelligence. If it matters, I personally believe it's a mix of both of those interpretations. I think that when doing the motion, Jing had no real intent to harm Usman or any of the other crew members. He did it mostly just to show his standing in the room. However, I don't think it's something he wouldn't do. The main reason he's not choosing any violent courses of action is because it's not the fastest way to get to what he wants. And Jing wants to get close with the crew, and brutally hurting someone would not be a good way to go about that. However, making himself someone who has to be listened to and being someone who can't be told to leave allows him to have a better chance at what he wants. And while I'm at it, this kind of supports the idea that Jing wanted to be there while Beyond was gone, because I highly doubt everything would be going the way Jing wanted if Beyond had been there. Also, a final point to add to the fact that Jing made Usman see himself die from just a single punch that didn't even land. He had so much intent and power behind that one punch, whether that be intent to kill, stop, or scare. The intent was so strong that Usman literally saw his face get crushed in. And I think that's comparable to when Morel told Gon to hit him, and Morel was like, oh shit, I'ma die. However, with Gon, he pulled out his strongest attack and focused as hard as possible on the one person he hated and wanted to kill. And compare that to Jing, who threw a single punch. Jing had a far more extreme result than from when Gon almost hit Morel with his strongest attack. What I'm trying to get at here is Jing has to be incredibly powerful for a single punch to have such an effect, unless you want to say Jing used some wacky Nen ability. Then, moving on from that, after that interaction, I've recently changed my opinion on how Jing reacts. So the first few times I read through this, I focused on how Jing suddenly senses a presence, then immediately looks for where it's coming from. I originally thought that he didn't look because he was scared or worried worried. He just simply sensed someone new and wanted to know where it was coming from. However, I didn't really consider how Jing was already acting all serious when he was with Usman. So now I'm thinking that while he intimidated Usman, this new person reacted to that situation, causing Jing to then feel a presence. So he was like, alright, who's challenging me now? The main difference between these two is with the first thought, Jing was caught a little off guard, and now I'm thinking he knew they were there while talking to Usman, and now he's like, okay, where are you? Hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, it turns out that the presence came from a girl that looks like a doll, but her name is Marion. Jing had asked who's the number 2 in the room, and Pariston ends up laughing and says of course he's the number 2, which makes Jing say that it must not be a hierarchy of strength, and that if Pariston were only about brute force, he'd pummel him and it would be easy. However, he says that's not the case, and that's what's troublesome. Jing says how Pariston would be laughing as he coughed up blood, and Jing says that the only option is to break Pariston's spirit. And very quickly I want to go over the fan translation, and it does say the same thing, but as usual it adds a little something extra. I'll show you the first translation real quick, pause if you want to read. But in the fan version, Jing says, with you, just showing off my strength should be enough. If I were to actually hit you, I'd end you. And I wouldn't want that, unless I were in a bad mood. Even if you were spewing blood and getting your head stomped in, you'd still be laughing from your stomach. And if you were to kneel, it'd be from your heart. Jing is still saying he could easily beat Pariston, and still saying he needs to break his spirit instead. But with this, he's saying it much more aggressively, which shows to how, if needed or maybe just in the mood, Jing can be extremely aggressive and violent. And a few things to talk about there. It's not too much, but there's a few ways to look at this interaction between Jing and Pariston. First is everything Jing said was true, and in fact, Pariston is not the strongest in the crew, a crew where Jing far surpasses everyone, and truly the only way to stop Pariston is to break his spirit. The second is that Jing was taunting Pariston more than anything else. It is true that Pariston will only be stopped from having his spirit broken, but it's not true that Pariston isn't the strongest in the crew. Me personally, I think that it's 100% true that Pariston can only be stopped by breaking his spirit. I do think Jing could easily beat him to a pulp. However, it's not because Pariston is weaker per se. Jing called him weak to taunt him. He likely called him physically weak. But in reality, Pariston is the second, if not the strongest person in that room in the grand scheme. And by grand scheme, I mean if everyone unleashes their Nen abilities, now listen to me closely, Pariston could possibly surpass Jing. But it's a messy subject. But moving on once again. Then Pariston seems excited by this proposal. But I do think Pariston can be excited about this new level of difficulty in this game, while also being upset Jing is so far ahead. And then after all that, Jing just finishes the conversation by saying that he's the new number 2 and asks if anyone has a problem with that. This causes Marion and Mosher to come out and say that depends. They say Pariston brings order and a plan. So what would Jing bring? Mosher also says that if he brings pointless chaos, they'll take him out. And both Marion and Mosher power up. Marion seems to only show off her aura. However, Mosher has 3 shadows, 2 behind, 1 below, which could be a sign of his Nen ability, but we don't know. But all this does absolutely nothing to Jing. He couldn't worry less about this potential fight, because first of all, his first goal isn't to fight, it's to talk. But it also shows their strength is no concern to Jing. Jing's basically completely chill, and he tells everyone that he'll pay them twice the amount Beyond offered them, and pay them up front. Otherwise, all their rules and plans can stay the same. And because it'll be important for later, just note how confidently and quickly Jing responded with this answer. But anyway, all the crew there are shocked. Mostly because that's an absurd amount of money to casually offer. We also see Pariston, who's thinking, and most likely he's thinking that he's annoyed he just has to sit back and watch the rest of Jing's plan unfold, but also that he knows Jing's plan will work. Mosher seems to be in disbelief. And Jing pretty much says that he doesn't want anything to change. He doesn't have any other conditions for taking the money. He says he'll answer questions and give advice, but they're totally welcome to keep following Pariston's orders. And this to me is the true beginning of Jing's plan to win over the crew. However, Jing also says that he'll still be number 2, and that's non-negotiable, even if they do follow Pariston's orders. Someone asked Jing what's the point of all that, and a quick answer to that is Jing just wants to keep Pariston out of a position of power. Specifically, the actual position, not the influence, because like he said, he doesn't care if they follow his orders. It's the actual position of power Jing wants to keep away from Pariston. However, at the same time, one of the reasons Jing says they can keep following his orders is because he wants to come off as a nice-ish, genuine guy, something along those lines. Maybe to come off as a respectable leader, maybe that's a better description. Anyway, but another person says they don't care. He asks Jing if he really will pay them double up front, and Jing just says of course. Then the guy asks if he really doesn't have any other conditions for taking the money, and Jing reassures him. Mosher doesn't really trust Jing and asks what happens if everyone doesn't agree to take the money, and Jing more or less says, I knew that might happen, so I'll just patiently wait for everyone to accept the money and through that accept him as the number 2. It's important to note that going about things this way is so important because the money is a very easy, simple way to win over a lot of people. Because even if it's not their biggest reason for joining the crew, but the money is still a very big bonus. And in terms of at least money, he brings something more to them than what even Beyond did. But allowing them to wait to accept it until they've accepted him as number 2 basically allows Jing to win over the crew without having to do that much convincing. Then the same guy from earlier is basically like, yeah, I don't care, you can add that money to my bank account. Jing sends him the money without hesitation, and the guy gets the notification that he got the money, and he leaves. He says he'll be right back, but someone says he won't be. Usman then pretty much declines Jing's offer and says how he'll never listen to him. That's important. Usman said he will never listen to Jing. However, Jing says he won't take no for an answer. And he says Usman can donate it to charity or whatever he wants to. But at some point, he needs to take the money. This is kind of a consistent method Jing uses. He basically makes you feel like you have an option or you have a choice, but in reality, you don't really. Because as seen with this money thing, he was like, take it if you want it, when you want it. But at the same time, he's like, you're gonna take it. Then Jing asks for Pariston's account, but he says he knows he's not doing it for any money. And Pariston says that he's right. Jing then talks to some of the crew and tells them all he knows about the Dark Continent. And if you want to know more about that, go watch my video on the Dark Continent. But something we can take away from this is how much research Jing has done. Once again showing how long he's likely been preparing for whenever he's finally able to go to the Dark Continent. Jing then asks the crew that after hearing about how dangerous the Dark Continent is, if they still want to go. Very interesting that Jing wants to make sure everyone wants to go. It's interesting because it seems like he's trying to slowly make the crew his own, so he can explore the Dark Continent how he wants to, or use the crew to help him get to the position he wants to be on the Dark Continent. The guy who took Jing's money ended up coming back, and it turns out he wanted the money to help save his sister at a hospital. He then gives his loyalty to Jing and says how he'll go wherever he goes. Others seeing him give his loyalty to Jing is more important than him actually doing it, because this will likely have an effect on how all the other crew members see Jing. Then Jing says that after knowing he's trying to save someone, he can't let him die. Because the guy still seems to be part of the crew, I don't think Jing meant he wouldn't let him go to the Dark Continent. I think he's saying he'll protect him. And to me, this doesn't seem quite genuine. It's certainly possible Jing wants to protect the guy out of the goodness of his heart. It's also possible that, like Gon, if you're on Jing's side, he will protect and care about you. But I think he's doing this more so to improve the way others see him, to make others more willing or likely to come to his side. And then finally, Jing says a few more things about the Dark Continent. Some time passes, and Jing's outside on a phone call with Gon. And I would go over this, but it opens a can of worms I don't want to get into right now, but I will in a later video. Anyway, when Jing comes back in, Mosher tells him that because Pariston recognizes him as number 2, the rest of the crew won't object to it. However, he does say some people won't accept the money. And note that I believe this scene is implying Marion, this other girl, Curly, Usman, and Gollum are some of the people that won't take the money. Masha makes another point to say that amongst the crew, they've decided not to follow any of his orders unless everyone takes the money. And Pariston sits there watching as he sees Jing's plan, or at least part of one, come to fruition. Once again, very important to note that Masha is very against Jing. We then later get a very important statement. So Masha says how they're all temp hunters, which means they're all part of Pariston's faction within the Hunter Association. But then Usman says, the whole lot of us won't stand a chance against an almighty starred hunter. This is really important because 9 people are in that room, including Pariston, and yet he still states how they couldn't beat Jing. However, first of all, Usman likely has no idea Pariston's true strength, so let's pretend Pariston isn't included in that statement. But it's also important to know that what Usman said was only about combat ability, because all the crew have different abilities and responsibilities. Not all of them are meant for combat, so it's not an absurdly important statement for Jing's power. However, he's still saying Jing could handle all 8 of them at once. All 8 because excluding Pariston. But another reason this statement is so important is not so much the literal fact Jing could beat them all in a fight, it's more the level Usman thinks Jing is on. For example, when Netero played the ball game with Gon and Killua, it wasn't important that they couldn't take the ball, it was important for how far out of their league Netero was. And then of course that Gon still managed to kind of trick him. But then Jing goes on to say that they don't have to lie and that they're all experts. He says how they became hunters for this journey and all have particular skills necessary for the expedition. He says how they've all been planning this for a long time with Beyond as their leader. And Jing continues to basically reveal how well he knows the crew. He says how they were all organized enough to keep Pariston as vice chairman, so Pariston can work on their plans while Netero was still technically in charge. And Jing describes them as pretending to be opportunists while sharpening their claws. He says how they all need strong willpower and that real cowards would never go to the Dark Continent just for the money. And while he says this, they all sit quiet, knowing that they can't hide the fact that they're at least somewhat capable, and have the spirit to at least go to the Dark Continent based off of the little they know. The important takeaways here is first that Jing wants this crew to be his because, like he said himself, they all have the necessary skills needed for the Dark Continent, and they all have the courage and spirit needed. However, at the same time, this little speech and this acknowledgement of the crew's abilities is just another addition to the positive view some of the crew may have on Jing. And finally, once again, showing how much Jing knows, how well he knows the crew, and possibly showing that he's been doing his research and preparation for a long time. However, while all this is happening, the extent Jing is showing to understand the group is making Pariston upset, and he says, "This is annoying. Is this why I don't like him?" And as Jing goes on, Pariston says, "So annoying. I might grow to hate someone for the first time in my life." This level of anger is all because he's seeing how far behind he is. He's upset because Jing is just that much more prepared. Jing then says how he knows not everyone in the crew is here, and he asks Pariston to tell them he'll pay them up front, but slightly taunts Pariston by saying this isn't in order. Pariston says he will, but he really starts to lose it, and he thinks to himself, "I want to see what I want to do to someone I hate." A new woman comes up and says she'll take the money now, but she asks Jing if he realized how many temp hunters there are working for Beyond, and Jing says even though there are 200 temp hunters, only about 25 of them will actually end up going to the Dark Continent. But it kind of raises the question of if Jing really has the money to pay double to 200 hunters if that were the case. Regardless, it's insane how much money Jing seems to have, because Curly says that Beyond offered all of them 1.5 billion. So Jing would be paying at least 25 people 3 billion. Curly also asks himself, what's the point in paying so much to take power from Pariston in name only? But like I had mentioned previously, I believe the reason for offering the money is just to give them a reason to hear him out on things, as well as keeping Pariston out of a position of power. What we see next isn't super important for anything besides adding to how we can understand Jing as a Nen user. Basically, Jing makes little shapes and animals out of Nen on his hands, and he tries to explain how to do it, but Monster says that's enough, he can't think anymore. Combined with the fact that none of them can do it or even get close, just shows how refined Jing's Nen or aura control is. Jing also far surpassed Usman, who started the challenge because he thought he was pretty good at it, further showing that something Usman worked so hard to do was beyond child's play for the likes of Jing. Also, just very important to note how two unnamed people and also Usman seem to be getting along with Jing, showing how not only do I think it's part of Jing's plan, but he is successfully getting people onto his side even if it's a slow process. Especially getting Usman to kind of like him, someone who verbally told him that he didn't trust him and basically said he didn't like him. That's a big improvement, and potentially shows Jing's charisma. Curly then challenges Jing in what I assume is his specialty, which is ancient language, and Jing proves to know either more or to just know it better. Curly admits defeat and says how he'll take his money. Not only does Curly give in to take the money, I'd argue that he took the money because Jing earned his respect, thus partly or entirely winning him over. Just another person Jing was able to get on his side. Then Pariston comes in looking like he's holding back tears and says that the hunter exam just ended and all of the temp hunters he sent in were failed. And Pariston notes how the new Zodiac Kurapika is proving to be quite competent and the reason why they all failed. Then Muir, this beautiful elvish looking dude, comes in and starts talking about how the hunter exam went. He says how they all passed the lie detector test, but they went through another test done by Kurapika who failed them all. Muir even says that if any one of them knew the plan for Beyond's escape, the Zodiacs could have found out. However, Pariston says they have no plan and Beyond will break free on his own. But Muir says how regardless it's easier for him because now he doesn't have to act as a double agent. All he has to do is follow Pariston and the crew. But then he starts talking to Jing and says how because he's from the Hunter Association, he needs to leave. And Muir looks like he might be trying to intimidate Jing, but of course that doesn't work. Jing basically says how he wants to explore the Dark Continent as he pleases. And so he leans towards Beyond over the Association. This is why knowing he resigned from the Zodiacs is important, because he did it because more or less he was changing his loyalty, or at least making it seem that way. He even says that he'll gladly help free Beyond, but he refuses to let Pariston cause his chaos. And Jing summarizes this by saying that his goal is to help Beyond and deter Pariston, and then asks Muir if he understands. But Muir does not. And before I move on, I want to make a very important point about Beyond. If you saw my video on Beyond, you know that I said that Beyond doesn't care about rewards or treasure on his expedition to the Dark Continent. He just wants to explore. However, with this statement from Jing that I totally forgot about, I might be wrong. Jing says the difference between him and Beyond is that for Beyond, the adventure continues until we bring back the fruits of the voyage. So a large understanding of Beyond I previously had could be incorrect. It could be true that all Beyond is searching for is reward and treasure and fame. However, I still feel that that's not quite true to Beyond's character. So here's my little defense. Beyond mostly talks about wanting to explore rather than find treasure. From my interpretation of everything Beyond does and says, it seems like to me that Beyond only cares about the treasure because he wants to offer it to Kakin in the world. Also, he can be allowed to go to the Dark Continent. One scene that really made me think Beyond is more concerned about the adventure than the treasure is when he's giving a little speech to his crew, where he says, "I want to go where no one has gone before, meet people nobody has met. I want to explore without bounds, acquire things nobody has touched. In the great wide open, leaving my mark on virgin territory." Now with this statement from Jing, I can see how this could show that Beyond wants the treasure on the Dark Continent. However, I still see his need for adventure and exploration being more important than the treasure. I see his goal as exploring until he gets the challenge he wants out of it, because I believe he lives by his father's motto, once you stop challenging yourself, your life is over. It's also possible that Beyond wants to explore and challenge himself, yet still wants to bring something back, as proof he survived the Dark Continent. And that interpretation would allow Jing's statement to be true, while also allowing my understanding to be partly correct. That Beyond is not primarily thinking about treasure. His first goal is to challenge himself and explore. And the difference between him and Jing is that Jing doesn't need any proof or recognition for going to the Dark Continent. He just wants to be there. I could also argue that what Jing is saying is more so that Beyond cares about coming back. Jing doesn't care about coming back. He only cares about being there. But I can't deny that the statement from Jing does make a big point that Beyond is all about treasure, whereas Jing is not. But I leave it up to you to decide whether Beyond is focused on challenge, exploration, or treasure. I just wanted to admit that I might be wrong and clear up potentially the actual or better understanding of Beyond. But back to the main story. Mir is basically upset with Jing, and Usman kind of tries to defend Jing to an extent, and that makes Mir also kind of upset and confused. Mir says, "Since when have you all been so buddy-buddy? Weren't all of you opposed to him before?" Usman continues his defense, which leads to two important things to take away. Mir seems to be the most loyal to Pariston and Beyond, and even Mir acknowledges how Jing is slowly winning over parts of the crew. Then some dudes who are later revealed to be some of Mir's underlings come in and basically say that they can't have two number twos, so either Pariston or Jing has to leave. However, Jing says all of them can leave instead, and then Pariston says that they can all die. They then conjure guns and immediately start shooting at both of them. However, both of them avoid it easily. Also, very importantly, two crew members are concerned for both of them, once again showing that Jing has won over some of the crew. And then as the men follow Ging and Pariston, Mir shouts out the order to find them, but specifically Jing. And it's also worth saying that Mir has greatly underestimated how capable Jing is. Then Jing basically says how Mir has a bad temper and this isn't an ideal situation. However, he's gonna take out the soldiers, but he does say he's gonna do it gently, which speaks for how he has to intentionally choose how much power he uses, but much more importantly, it brings up two possibilities. Either Jing didn't want to hurt them out of the goodness of his heart, or he knew that if he was too rough, he would ruin his standing with the crew members he's won over, and the ones he still needs to. Jing is able to easily figure out that the soldiers are emitters, and even though it wasn't too hard for him to figure that out, it does show how good his combat awareness is, and how even in a situation like this, he was able to easily read his opponents. Also, it appears that anyone with a simple ability is child's play for Jing, which makes me think it'll take a complex and strong ability to take on Jing. But anyway, Jing goes on to basically say he's gonna use a Nen ability, and even though Pariston asks if he's sure he wants to let him see it, Jing says yeah, it's no problem. Jing shows off an impressive looking punching ability, which shocks Pariston at first, because he thinks he's actually seeing Jing's Nen ability, but Pariston then realizes Jing has just copied Leorio's ability. The way Jing used the ability is actually really interesting. He basically was able to use punches that could travel through the ground, then come up, hitting men down the hallway. Jing then explains that this isn't actually anything of his own Nen ability. In fact, it's purely a natural talent he has. Now, Pariston says he copied Leorio's ability, however, Jing says he's only imitating it. But it's unclear to me what exactly the difference is. If I had to guess, I'd say it would mean that Jing could imitate, say, Gon's Rock, however, he couldn't copy Knuckles' APR. Both of those are punching abilities, but I think it's the conditions, restrictions, and nature of the ability that determines whether Jing can imitate it. That's why I think Gon's Rock and Knuckles' APR are perfect examples of what he maybe could and couldn't do. Jing shows off another variation of Leorio's ability, which intrigues Pariston, but essentially the ability lets him use ultrasound to see guys behind a wall, and then he can send a type of blast through the wall, hitting the guys on the other side. After Jing defeats all the soldiers, he tells Pariston that he knows he set all of this up to try to figure out his Nen ability. Once again, it's interesting to see how Jing, with limited information, figured out all this was Pariston's scheme. Unless you want to argue that it was all just a poorly made made plan. But in that case, I would also say that Pariston's plan was so bad because he was frantic to try to gain the upper hand on Jing. So he rushed through making a plan and didn't take the time to think out a good one, which would be the result of Jing's attempt to put him off balance. Then Jing and Mir start having a conversation, and a lot of what we learn from this is what Mir's position in the group is. Jing says how Mir's soldiers are far too weak to handle the Dark Continent, but Mir says that doesn't matter, and one of the soldiers say that their only job is reconnaissance, artillery support, as well as sniper cover fire. It's explained that the main firepower comes from one of the crew, Gollum, who has yet to leave their mech suit, but they materialize the mech suit and then an emitter joins them, creating the bullets. This makes the suit far stronger than it would be if it were only manned by one person. Gollum is part of an 11-man squad called the Stone Wall, and they managed to come out of a civil war without a single casualty. And Jing notes how impressive that is. And it's hard to say whether the rest of the Stone Wall squad also spawns mech suits, but regardless, the unit is definitely strong, although I'm not confident they're anything too special. Jing then asks Mir to tell his soldiers to take his money and accept him as number 2, but Mir explains he doesn't actually have a real problem with him being second in command, he just doesn't like the fact that money is involved. Mir says how between mercenaries, nothing is more important than trust between them, and money can make people change sides, so the fact that money got involved has made Mir and his men distrust Jing. Jing apologizes for the way he's made Mir and his men feel, and although he seems genuine, I don't entirely buy it. And I think Jing realized that Mir and his men are kind of a bump in his plan, and he now has to find a way to get them on his side after his original attempt failed. Jing says instead of having them take the money directly, he'll donate their pay to the Norwell Fund, which is a charity that provides financial, psychological, employment, education, and child care support for surviving families of mercenaries who died in battle. Mir asks if he's serious, because by donating to the account, Jing would become a mercenary, and according to the rules of the charity, Jing wouldn't be able to refuse any orders from someone higher up in the organization. Jing then tells Mir that he's serious because this is the only way he'd take the money, but also he likely isn't worried about anyone giving him orders because it's not like anyone can actually force him to do anything he doesn't want to. Also, we can add points to Jing's preparedness because it's very possible he had a backup plan for if Mir didn't accept the money, because knowing about the Norwell Fund seems like something Jing learned in advance for if this exact scenario happened. Mir says how he doesn't understand Jing and why he's so hellbent on giving them the money. Jing says how he just made the offer before even thinking about it, but he also wanted to be accepted by the crew as they accepted the money. However, I don't believe entirely that he wasn't thinking about it when he made the offer. I think it's all part of his plan and he's just kind of acting dumb. But you can totally take his word for it and believe Jing is making stuff up as he goes. We also then immediately see 5 crew members who might be 5 people who have more or less joined Jing's side, or it just represents 5 people who've taken his money, although there are more people than that. Then once again, Jing says some more stuff that I just don't believe. But it does add to the fact that Jing might be making stuff up as he goes. Jing says that he wanted to go to the Dark Continent, yet Beyond was the one who made the challenge to go first. He says he was a little upset by this and came to the crew's base to blow off some steam. But when he got there, the first thing that came out of his mouth was "let me join." And he says even he was surprised that he said it. However, I just don't buy it. First of all, I think it's likely Jing wants to seem much less threatening to Mir, and he achieves this by acting dumb, acting like he has no plan. But also, this is the guy who pretty much predicted and planned for all of Gon's actions, and ended up helping Leorio be in a position to challenge Pariston in the election arc. So I just don't buy that he's been making stuff up as he goes and he has no plan. Jing then says that he doesn't even remember how things got to the money. Once again, this seems weird to me, but maybe he really is just this dumb. And it's really interesting to me that this leads to Masher basically explaining how at first he didn't trust Jing, but now he does, at least to some extent. I think it's interesting because maybe Jing wanted to act kinda dumb so he could have one of the crew come in and essentially defend him, once again adding to his appearance and standing with the rest of the crew. Mir keeps pressing Jing about why he brought in money, to which Jing basically says he wasn't really thinking about it and didn't mean to cause the problems that he ended up causing. And Jing says that the only thing he really planned for was to take away Pariston's authority to stop his evil schemes. I don't want to repeat myself too much, so it's up to you whether you think Jing's behavior seems real or it's just part of his plan. Miura ends up saying he'll talk to his men about taking the money for the Norwell Foundation. He also says that he accepts Jing as number 2, but he also makes it clear that all of the soldiers on the Dark Continent will be commanded by him. And it seems very clear that this is non-negotiable for Miura, and Jing has no problem allowing that. Miura also clarifies that once Jing donates to the Foundation, he becomes a mercenary that will make him one of Miura's soldiers. Thus, on the Dark Continent, Jing will be under his command. So Jing has somewhat gotten Miura to accept him. So the question is Jing really making stuff up as he goes? Or did he have a backup plan on how to handle Miura when he wouldn't accept the money? Then Pariston comes in and pretty much says that because their plan to have men inside the Hunter Association failed, there's no problem with them all taking Jing's money. Then Jing tells Pariston that he can continue calling the shots as if he were number 2, but Pariston says he refuses. He wants to see how well Jing can handle things, and Jing says in that case he won't hold back. And a final note about this scene is I think Pariston seems to be refreshed. I think he's ready for the next round of games that he will play with Jing. And I think by Jing saying that he won't hold back, he's acknowledging that it's time for their game to get serious. So boom, that's all we got for Jing in the manga so far. But because I went over so much, I want to go over everything we know about Jing. We know for sure that his 2 main objectives is to keep Pariston from causing chaos and to get on the Dark Continent and explore freely. It also seems that Jing has another objective, which is to slowly turn Beyond and Pariston's crew into his own, or at least gain a major influence over them. Also, depending on how you want to trust Jing's word, he either has everything planned out and has been preparing for a long time, or he's genuinely making up everything as he goes, while also making sure to get to his 2 main objectives. We know that Pariston is used to being the one in control, yet Jing comes out of nowhere completely outplaying Pariston in every way. So through that, and depending on whether you think he has a plan, Jing is proving to be incredibly intelligent. We see several smaller displays of power that gives us a good idea that Jing will prove himself as a top nen user in the world. And assuming Jing is attempting to gain the loyalty or influence over the crew, he's made major steps in doing so, having successfully gotten everyone to see him as number 2 and having at least one person give their entire loyalty to him. As I went over many times, Jing is not a good person, but he's certainly not evil. It's hard to say exactly what his limits are, but we do know that he's likely willing to do whatever he needs to in order to get to his goal. However, he still chooses to talk and negotiate way before even thinking about fighting. When it comes to Jing's confidence, it's incredibly important. Yes, for the fact that he's confident he can win this game against Pariston and get what he wants done, but I think maybe even more importantly, he's more than confident in his ability to survive the Dark Continent. But it's also important to say that dying there is just a minor thought to him. If anything, it's nothing more than a basic risk of going. But there we have it. That's all I got for you today. If you made it to the end of this video, you're a real one, because this is a long one. But as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments.